Welcome to Midlife Matters. I'm Marie, and each week I'm joined by my friends Julie and Mindy to talk about all the topics keeping women in the middle years up at night. Today we're talking about deep thoughts. Is it better to be happy for a little while than unhappy forever? Do our minds need some boredom? When is it okay to quit something? Join us as we share our thoughts on these topics and more. Listeners, today we're talking about some deep thoughts. Is it better to be happy for a little while than unhappy forever? Do our minds need to have some boredom? When is it okay to quit something? And Mindy's not here with us today, but Julie and Mindy and myself, we did all talk about these at one time, but now we're kind of revisiting and we're thinking we have more to say on this subject because with age comes wisdom and more experiences. And so we just feel like, hey, let's take another look at these questions. And Julie, what were your thoughts as you started rethinking about these questions?
I actually went back and listened to the episode. I think it was episode 188. And I'm really glad I did because so much of my life has changed since we recorded that episode. I mean, it was hard then and it's hard now, but it's hard for a different reason, different set of circumstances. So it was interesting to hear how I viewed these questions and my answers and then how things have changed.
Yeah. And just to give a little background, maybe someone's new. Do you want to kind of say where you were then and where you are now?
Yeah, I think this episode came out in 2022, so almost 2 years ago. So we were 1 year into John's cancer diagnosis, terminal cancer diagnosis. So I knew what was coming, but we weren't there yet. I was just trying to work through that. And now 2024, he will be gone a year in November. So like I said, it's not like that my life is any easier. It's just different for different reasons. Mm-hmm. So like you said, hopefully we become wiser as we get older, but also we're in different places. So we think about things differently.
Mm-hmm. And I couldn't help but think about the change in your circumstances as I re-listened to that episode also. So I think there are some thoughts. Why don't we start out with that first one, with that first question, which was, is it better to be happy for a little while than unhappy forever?
Explain what you think that means. What are they getting at?
I took a few things from that, make sure that you aren't holding yourself back or avoiding things that would be good for you because you don't want the pain or the risk of loss or even inconvenience. Listeners, in this episode where we had first talked about this, there was the story of a couple that had a cat and they loved their cat and they got a lot of enjoyment out of her. And then she died and after 10 years. So they thought, well, maybe it's easier without a cat. We can travel. We can do all these things. But every time they came home from a trip, they really still missed that cat. But they thought, we don't want to have another cat because then she's going to die and we're going to have to feel this pain all over again. But one day the woman was having her hair done and her hairdresser said, but wouldn't it be better to be happy for a little while than to be unhappy forever? And that just kind of clicked something in the woman's mind. And so I guess that's just a different way for us to look at things, because I do think that sometimes we can guard our hearts because we don't want to be unhappy, but then we might miss out on things that would have made us happy even just for a little while.
And I think this really resonated with me more this time around than the last time we talked about it. Mm-hmm. Kind of on two different levels. And one might be a little tangential to all of this, but I'll get around to my point. It made me think about my upcoming trip to London. And I've got a trip to see my grandchildren. And that is exciting. And that is something to look forward to. And back when John first passed away, I knew I loved to travel, but I just couldn't see where it was going to fit into my life. I just don't know when I'll be ready to travel. I thought, okay, I'm going to have to be through with my grief. I'm just not going to want to go do something fun like that. And I think, so many times it's common to think I'll be happy when, Mm-hmm. When I get married, when I have a baby, when I do this, when I, whatever. And mine was kind of when I'm through grieving. Mm-hmm. And, this is just so cliche, mm-hmm. but happiness is a journey, not a destination. And it's all the obstacles in life, I'll be happy when you realize those obstacles are your life. Like instead of wishing them away and saying, I can't be happy yet, or, these are my life. So this is the time to be happy. And I realize too now that grief is going to be part of my life. It's here to stay in some fashion.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think we just kind of believe this lie that happiness is just always lying a tiny bit ahead of us. Like we're just not there yet. And I saw another quote that was really similar to this that said, I can't wait until life isn't hard anymore before I decide it's okay to be happy. And I really understand that because it may always be hard. Like I just can't wait. I can't depend on that. But here's the other thing that I thought really related to this essay. It's like, I'm a little bit afraid of going on my trip because I know I'm going to be happy and then I'm going to come home and be sad again. Like I still have to come home.
Yeah.
I still have to, like it's so fun to think about going to see my grandchildren, but that's a short thing. Going on my trip, it's 9 days in London, but I mean, the anticipation, the planning has really been fun. But I know how short that is, and part of me is like, oh, it'd probably be better just to not even have that happiness because if I'm going to come home and be sad again, and so that's what this made me think about that. No, it'll be worth it. It'll be worth it to do this. And then something else will come along. I just have to think of it that way.
That's really good, Julie. I mean, I did think about this in conjunction with travel. I have to kind of say to myself, because I find the idea and the planning and the actual travel, like on an airplane and like trying to sleep in new places, is all under the umbrella of unhappiness, like pain. Like I don't enjoy that process. Right. And so I could just say, that's such a hassle. I thought about this with travel, like, I'm not going to bother doing it. But then I am happy when I do finally get to a destination and you can reconnect with your spouse or your family, or you see new things, or you just reset or refresh your mind or your body. And this can be travel for me, like even if it was just a night or two away, up to like 2 weeks. For some reason, the whole process of getting there is like a big hurdle for me. And like planning, I don't really have to plan childcare, but you have to plan pet care and who's going to take care of things when you're gone and what's going to be happening. And I don't know. I just like, what am I going to need to wear? And what is there going to be? Am I going to be comfortable? And, how long is that plane ride? And what would happen if we got, in an accident? Or I don't know. All these thoughts go into my mind. And so I know that I could say, I think I'm going to bother with trips, but then I'm always so happy when I actually get somewhere. So, but I may have spent like a couple months dreading it, and I might only be there like 5 days. So it's kind of out of whack. And that kind of came to mind when I was re-looking at this saying.
Yeah. And here I am, I'm dreading the happiness because it may not last very long. Like that's so weird.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess maybe we all just don't like changing emotions. It's almost like you get in one emotion and it's almost easier to stay, or you dread having to adjust to a different emotion.
Yeah, I think when I just said that out loud, that makes sense, that you're almost comfortable in the unknown of just quasi happy, or like you don't want any big peaks or troughs, just
right,
something constant, even if it's not the best.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's definitely a lot to think about with that quote. Listening to myself, I remember in that episode, I said, one of the things that I had kind of struggled with was that I was happy staying at home, but there were all these warnings that if you stay at home, you're going to be miserable when your kids left. You won't have anything to do. You won't be basically even a person anymore. Like you'll be a shell. And anyways, it was interesting to me listening to myself say that, because I said that even though I heard those warnings, I was still happy at home. And I didn't want to go back to work just based on warnings of something that might happen.
Future.
So isn't it better just to be happy at home for a little while if even in the future I might be unhappy? And it's just so interesting to hear myself from 2 years ago, because now I'm a little further on the empty nest journey, and I am not miserable, and I am not a shell. And so I guess I want to encourage other midlife women that might be listening, because this time of year, I'm seeing a lot of posts about like, my kids have left for college, and that's super like understandable. And I'm, upset, and I'm crying, and is it going to get better? And I guess I would just say that even from 2 years ago, I would say that you don't know maybe what it's going to be like, but so far, I have not found myself really at a loss for things to do or falling victim to all those dire warnings that I heard.
Yeah, and that's encouraging to me too, because it says that just because you can't picture it doesn't mean it can't happen. Or you don't, when your kids leave, you just want it back the way it was, and that's all you can focus on. And you can't have that, so it just seems hopeless. It just seems bleak, but you just don't know how all of that's going to play out. And things do get better, and things do change, and things come along, and you just have to trust that.
Okay, let's look at the next question. Do our minds need some boredom? And how did you feel about listening to what we thought about last time? Because I know when I thought about this 2 years ago, I thought, I know our minds do need some boredom, but I also know that I fill a lot of the blank space with a podcast or music or just anything. I used to spend a lot more time in silence before entertainment became so prevalent.
True. But 2 years ago, the internet, audiobooks, podcasts were already prevalent. So I feel like my life hasn't changed a whole lot in the last 2 years. I just realize more that I need silence than I used to realize. You know what I'm saying? In grief, I've been reading everything I can get my hands on, listening to podcasts, audiobooks. Like, I'm wanting to know what's normal, what's to be expected. How do people go about this? It's kind of like being on this long quest to learn something new and hard, but I'm realizing that it can be too much. Like, sometimes I can't even recognize my own thoughts anymore. Like, is this their thoughts or mine? Like, how do I feel about this? So sometimes I think noise isn't just the sounds we hear. Like, sometimes it's just too much information in our head, like from reading or whatever. It can just be information overload. And then I've learned that too much noise isn't good for anxiety either. Sometimes I feel like an engine's just constantly revving up inside of me, and it's fueled by too much information. Like, I have to process that information. I have to think, well, what am I going to do with that? Instead of just, letting it spin around endlessly. I think, yes, like, information can be comforting, but there's a fine line, and it can be kind of debilitating too. Too much information, So, yeah, I appreciate more a walk in nature, something to disconnect. Like, I'm not going to walk with headphones. I'm not going to go on a hike with music or whatever. It's good to just be quiet. And another thing is, like, when John got sick, he just had a lot of fatigue. And I remember he would go to bed about 5:00. And that was probably the hardest thing for me to adjust to, as far as practical things that changed in my life, because life was so boring. Like, what do you do after 5:00 when you're just sitting there by yourself? Like, that involved dinner and TV time and whatever, like taking walks or whatever. So that, I just remember hating nighttime, hating it, and I kept thinking, how am I ever going to survive this when he is gone? But really, actually, just the opposite has happened. I feel like the Lord used those 3 years to prepare me for now. And I said in an earlier podcast, I love my nights. Like, that's my favorite time of day, is my nights. So I think some of that was being prepared. And then also, as you age, and mine kind of happened less subtly, but what you call boredom changes. Like, what you used to find boring, now you kind of relish it, like some of it, So that's, I don't know, I found that interesting. Is what I used to call boring and fearful, I enjoy now. Yeah. And then I tell myself, like, because I tend to vacillate between high anxiety and boredom. Like, there's not a lot of in between. And if I'm truly bored, sometimes I say, this feels better than the alternative right now. Like, it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay to be bored.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess I'm still as convicted this year as I was 2 years ago about not allowing boredom. It's not that I'm afraid of boredom, and it's not even that I don't allow boredom. I think this can happen once your kids leave. Like, there's nothing on your calendar, so you think, well, how can I say no to anything? Because it's not like the space is already filled. So then if something comes up that you could do during that time, well, how do you pick and choose when all the days are pretty much open? So I think sometimes you can get really filled with like a lot of activities, but you might not enjoy all of them to the same level, but you have time. So you just keep kind of doing them. And so, yeah, I guess I just think that you see empty calendar spaces for the first time in a long time and you start filling them up. And then it really would be better for you if you just kind of scheduled in like, no, I stay home on Thursday mornings because I know I need that time to think and not like catch up on grocery shopping, like just to be in your home. Like I think Mindy said recently, I don't remember when, in one of the episodes where like playtime or like a time that is refreshing is when she doesn't have to leave the house in the morning. Because when you have to leave the house in the morning for something every day, when you don't have to, it's so wonderful. And instead of scheduling that, I kind of just wait for it to
leave it to chance.
And then it doesn't happen as often as I want it to happen. So then I get frustrated. But I think, well, I mean, I have this other chunk of time, but it's still not the same as the morning. You know what I'm saying? So I don't know.
Yeah, it's like letting your availability dictate your schedule instead of really what you want to do. And I know that's, I used distraction a lot the first 6 months that John was gone, and I was afraid of an empty calendar. So I filled it. And I started to get to where I just want to stay home. I just want to be bored for a little bit, like it's okay. So I had to kind of get over that fear. Like, okay, if I'm bored one day, I can still do something tomorrow.
Well, and I'm wondering, like, are you like, I don't ever sit in my house and I'm never bored. Like, I'm never sitting on the couch thinking, oh my goodness, I cannot think of one thing. I am so bored. I don't really think that's ever happened in my entire life. I think I might be doing quieter activities, reading or just listening to my own thoughts, or I might sit there and pet the dog or, but it doesn't mean that I'm necessarily bored. I just think that in society's definition, I'm not being productive.
Yeah, or doing something that a lot of other people would qualify as fun. So it seems like, so you label it as boring? Like, well, I'm just boring. I'm just sitting here reading on my back porch, listening to the birds. Like, well, that shouldn't be boring. I think it's more what we label as boring, baby. Because I don't ever feel bored either. I've got a lot to read and look at and think about. But on the outside, it might just look like I live a boring life.
And sometimes we need to hear ourselves think. And once our kids have gotten older, maybe we're so used to not being able to hear ourselves think that then we fill it with a bunch of podcasts and audiobooks and TV on in the background. And like, it's okay to hear yourself think.
Yeah, I like quiet sometimes. I think I said this in the last podcast. Sometimes I'll get in the car and drive somewhere. It might take me 20 or 30 minutes and I'll realize nothing was on in the car. I'm having this conversation to myself.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's the only way you can know what you think is to face it and listen to yourself. And I guess that, that's been a little bit of a fear the last year, is like, I don't want to think about things, but for me, it is time to think about what I, what I think about things, not just everybody else.
Right. All right. Well, the third thing that we talked about was a good quit is powerful. So it's like, it's okay to quit something. And I don't know if this is like a human thing or just an American thing, but I think that we just also all feel ashamed if we quit something. And listening to ourselves from 2 years ago, it was kind of like, Yeah, we don't need to be ashamed.
Well, my immediate thought was, I love that I'm getting good at quitting.
Okay.
And it's not maybe what you think. It's not like I don't have any perseverance. I don't have any stamina. I don't have any stick to itness. It's not that. It's just that I think I did a lot of things because I thought I should, or I ought to be doing this. So therefore I do. It's not even so much what other people think I'm doing, but just for some reason, I think I ought to be doing this or I should. So those are things that are easier to give up now. And then some of it's just maybe I never really did even enjoy doing that. Like what, it was all about some expectation or whatever. So that's become clear in my mind, like what I want to do and what I enjoy doing. And some of it I've just needed to give up because of what we talked about just before this, the quiet time, the space, the time to be in your own thoughts. And I realized a lot of things I've quit. I've got a lot of things to go back to when I'm ready.
Sure.
When I'm ready to go back to. One thing that Mindy brought up in the previous episode was that she was often reluctant to share things about like her plans for the future or dreams because she felt pressure to follow through with those. So she thought it was just better not to share. And because she didn't want to be seen as a quitter. And I thought this was really funny. It just came to me when this question came up. The other night, I went to a fundraiser and I rode with some people in my neighborhood. They picked me up and I had worked with the husband a little bit, but I had only met the wife once. So we're sitting in the back seat chatting and she said something that she said, I think one of her kids had done. I said, oh, I would love to do that someday. And then it just went on in passing. Well, a few minutes later, she came back around and said, Julie, would you actually ever do that? And I was like, who me? Like, what? No, like, I don't know. I felt like if I had told you that thing, Marie, you would have never said, Julie, are you really going to do that? Like, you would just know that I wasn't.
Oh,
but since she was a stranger, she thought that was a perfectly reasonable thing to consider in the future. And so, even if I never did that one thing, it just made me start to think like, why do I put myself in a box? Why do I think these things aren't possible or whatever, but it is very intimidating to put that stuff out there because you don't always want to be seen as just a talker and never a doer.
Yes. That's the thing.
Like, oh yeah, Julie's always throwing out these ideas, but she's never going to do any of it.
Right.
I feel like I do that to my daughter a lot. She'll go, but Mom, you could do this, you could do this, you could do this. And then when she sees me never doing them, she's probably like,
It is true. I don't like to say things that I might like to do because I don't want people to circle back around and ask me about them.
Yeah. And she did that like in 5 minutes in the car. It was funny.
Yeah. You were probably like, I'm not gonna say anything like that again.
This was like a ultimate fantasy pie in the sky kind of idea, but it did just make me think, why are we embarrassed about that?
Yeah. There's this thing about like, you don't want to be known as just a dreamer and not following through. And like, that would be a bad personality quality or whatever.
Or like, that's so sad,
Yeah.
Just living in this dream world, but never doing,
Right. Well, this essay did talk about how it is okay to quit something. Like giving yourself permission to quit something also gives you permission to try something. Gretchen Rubin's mantra, we've talked about her a lot over the years of be Gretchen. So, you put your own name in there, like be Marie. And I think it's okay. Like if you're doing something and it's like, you know what, other people find that fun, but it's just not for me. So I tried it and I'm going to quit it. And that's okay. And I was thinking of another example, like when we wanted to adopt a dog, I kind of wanted to adopt a dog, but I wasn't sure if I wanted to adopt a dog. And I looked at a lot of different rescues in the Nashville area. And the only one I found that did this, and there may be other ones now, but the only one I found that did this was the one I ended up going with because it allowed you to try. So you were allowed to take a dog home for a week. And if you didn't like it, you were allowed to bring it back, no questions asked. For any reason, like say I just didn't enjoy owning a dog at all, or I didn't like this particular dog or whatever. And I went to the area animal shelters and I looked at all the dogs in the cages and I felt terrible for them. And I took a few on walks, but I was unable to decide if I wanted to try being a pet owner based on a 15-minute meeting in the animal shelter. I just couldn't make that commitment. I'd never been a pet owner before. I didn't know if I would enjoy it. And so I kind of felt like this organization giving you permission to quit was also giving me permission to try. And I tried it and I did like it and I kept that same dog and everything. But I guess I would just say that if we know that we can quit something, that's actually a good thing, that I think we'll probably do more in life knowing that we don't have to do this thing forever.
Yeah, because that's a huge burden to carry, to think starting something means you're stuck in that forever. Like, no, that's just not the way it needs to be. I think you even said in the old episode, kind of tongue in cheek, like, isn't it better to try and quit than to have never tried at all? It's like,
right.
Yes, and I think we get that from that fear of when maybe our kids are little. I remember when a kid would want to play an instrument or do a sport. It was like, okay, if we're going to do this, we're going to commit to a season or a year or whatever, because you didn't want your kids to just quit when it got hard. But I don't think I quit things because they get hard anymore. It's just not a good fit. I don't like it. I don't need to be doing it. It's not that it's hard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I can totally.
It's just wrong, wrong for me.
Right. I think that is where it kind of comes from, is raising our kids. We don't want to raise them. We don't want them to grow up to be quitters. But we're already grown. We already know we're not quitters. If we really wanted to do it, we would do it.
Right.
All right, listeners. This little update on deep thoughts was really interesting to me. And so we are now going to play the episode from 2 years ago. And there's so many things that we talked about in there that I had forgotten or that hit a new chord for me now. So listeners, we hope that you'll keep listening and just kind of refresh your memory on the things that we talked about then, because I bet it's still applicable. Longtime listeners, you know that we get a lot of our ideas from Real Simple Magazine, and one of the series that they have had in the past, and I'm not sure, they might still be running it, was My Simple Realization. And I love these little essays. They're kind of like little quotes that make you think, and then they also tell a little story about the quote. So we're going to dive right into that today because we have so much to say, and we definitely want listeners to contribute. So if we're talking about something and you get an idea, feel free to chime in. We'll tell you how to contact us at the end of the episode. But Julie and Mindy, when you received these essays from me, 1, had you ever seen the My Simple Realization series? And 2, do you like these kinds of essays?
I had not. I don't take that magazine, and I have only seen what you've sent me in the past.
Okay.
So I've not read these, but I do like reading those kind of things. They're short, but they usually resonate in some way with a lot of people,
I agree. I've not seen it before. I felt like they're light enough, yet it's kind of food for thought. Like it's not smacking you in the face, but you kind of walk away. It's lingering in your mind.
Mm-hmm. The first one we want to talk about, listeners, is the quote is, "It's better to be happy for a little while than unhappy forever." And basically, it is a little story about a couple that lived in Florida, and I'm just going to read a little bit of it. "When my husband and I first moved to the Florida Keys, we intended to spend only the winter months there. The rest of the year, we would travel to Europe and go to shows in New York City. Or so we thought. Instead, they fell in love with this little cat that was hanging around their house. And they ended up staying around their house for the next 10 years for this little cat. Basically, in the story, a little rescue that showed up outside their door because they loved it. Then she passed away and they were heartbroken and they thought, well, at least we'll be able to travel now. So we booked trips everywhere, staying for months in Paris, Denmark, Manhattan. And though we had a lot of fun, without a warm, affectionate cat to return to, the house in Key West seemed empty and cold, and we both felt a little rudderless in our lives and even a little depressed. And so, of course, a friend showed them another rescue, similar to their one that had passed away. But they thought, oh, she's adorable, but we don't want to risk breaking our hearts over another pet that might die soon. And then one day while I was getting my highlights done, my hairstylist asked, "Isn't it better to be happy for a little while than unhappy forever?" It was a total light bulb moment. We had been so happy with Jem, which was their first cat, and we were so unhappy without her. Wouldn't even a few more happy days be worth it? So they raced to the SPCA to rescue their new cat, and with a little veterinary care and lots of good food and love, she is still with them 5 years later.
Mm-hmm.
So, of course, that's a cute, heartwarming story, but it's more than about the cat.
There's a lot packed in there.
There is. So tell me what you guys thought about when you read that essay.
Well, I mean, basically, let's break it down. They're weighing the joy that something brings versus the sorrow of losing it.
Mm-hmm.
Gosh, I feel like that's right where I'm living right now. And, I think in an attempt to be happy, which I think they could classify happy as maybe never failing at something, never losing anything, having no losses. I mean, it's true that you'd miss out on some pain in life, but you'd also miss out on a ton of joy. And I think I'm learning that joy and sorrow coexist. Like it's not an either or. Mm-hmm. Like we really only understand joy and sorrow because we know them both, Mm-hmm. And I just have to quote C.S. Lewis here because, when he married his wife, Joy, she died shortly after that. And he says, grief is as deep as your love. Like the extent of the pain you have now is a reflection on how great things were, Mm-hmm. They go hand in hand. And, like pain does fade, but joy can last forever. And so I think you don't want to miss out on things for fear of losing them.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Mindy? What did you feel like when you read that?
Well, I thought of seasons, not only with weather, but in life, and how when a new season comes, you're saying goodbye to the old season, which again is the joy and sorrow together. To get something new, you have to let something go a lot of times. In our family, I immediately thought of all of our different moves and the communities and the churches and the people that we have opened ourselves up to. And there were places that we lived that I kept up walls because I knew we wouldn't be there long and we were unhappy. I would call it safe, but we were unhappy. And so I realized looking back, even the places that we did open ourselves up, we did let people in, we learned to love new people and we became part of church families and we served and it was our lives. And it was really painful to leave. It was really hard to leave. At the same time, we were much happier in those places.
Mm-hmm. Did either of you reflect on whether you live this way or whether it's uncomfortable for you to live? Like, did either of you reflect on whether you live this way?
Well, I definitely think it's easier to love secure things. I think it's a self-protective thing. Mm-hmm. Like you said, Mindy, when you open yourself up, that the hurt is going to even be greater if you lose it. Mm-hmm. So it's easier to love secure things. But then I thought, what really is secure? Mm-hmm. I mean, nothing is really. We might as well let loose and.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think there's certain things, like I know when we moved here, again, for just our family, I had to make a decision, and I know my kids did as well, and I saw them making it of, all right, this is going to be home. We are going to put down roots. We are going to open ourselves up. We are going to let people in, and we're going to give of ourselves so that we can make this place home. Because I do know that a couple of my children in previous places, I saw them protecting themselves and not opening up and not making a lot of friends because they didn't want to. They're like, we're just going to leave. What's the point? And so in this season of life, each of my family members have chosen to open, to learn to love, to learn to let new people in. But I think there's other things that, I still kind of like, I'm like, no, I'm not willing to do that. And I think it just depends on what it is. Mm-hmm. Okay, so something as simple or as difficult as adopting a pet, like even from the article, I thought about that. I'm like, I'm just not not because of the pain of losing it, but the pain of owning it. But I mean, that's a different story.
Well, yeah, I could definitely see that. I asked several women and some men to comment on this. Like I sent them the texts and I sent them the article, and I just wanted to get a variety. And somebody wrote back something that is similar to what you just said, Mindy, where you said that your family members just had to make the choice kind of to be happy. And this person wrote, for most people, happiness doesn't just happen. You have to realize what makes you happy, nurture it, be flexible, make adjustments to your life, be willing to work for it. She said, I have seen so many just not realize they have some control over what happens. The word happiness is very close to the word happens. That means what happens to us and what we can make happen. We have to decide. And I think in that situation, you aren't just waiting for happiness to fall into your lap. You're saying, well, what can I do to be happy here? What's my part? You know?
Right.
I thought that was interesting. I also thought it was interesting that several people sent me songs. This made them think of different songs. I'll get to those in a second, but this was a text thread between a couple people, and the person said, I think it's basically like saying it's better to have loved and lost than never loved at all. She just picked the word happy. And the other person said, I don't think it's better to be happy for a little while than unhappy forever. I'd just take no emotion over being unhappy forever, which I thought was quite the interesting statement. They would rather just feel nothing than risk being unhappy. But then they followed it up with this song. Lady A says, I'd rather hurt than feel nothing at all. So they said, you know, but there's these songs out there that say just the opposite. Like, I do think that we're told by society all the time, it's better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all. But it's not as easy for some people to do that as you might think.
It's not, because anytime you open yourself up to any other living thing, you're going to be hurt.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like you will.
Right.
And so it's hard.
Yeah. And I think as parents, you really know what this means, because there's a cost to love and happiness. There's the opposite, pain. And I think as parents, you know firsthand that, because like you have all this joy having this child, but if the child is hurt or rejected, you feel that, and there's just no way around that. So that's just a great example of how they go hand in hand. The joy and the sorrow, they just, they coexist. They have to.
Does anyone know the Garth Brooks song, The Dance? I mean, a famous line is, I could have missed the pain, but I would have had to miss the dance. Someone sent me that, which is true. Someone else sent me a song that I had not heard before by Johnny Swim called Devastating. And she pointed out these lyrics. I want to love you till it's devastating, meaning until, the very end when I lose you. And then another lyric from that is, it's good when the ending's tragic. And it's kind of like, Mindy's making a bad face, but it's kind of like, it was good. Like you said, Julie, your pain is a reflection of how much joy you had.
Yeah, the hurt is a sign of how much love there was. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. I guess this article just really challenged me to think about ways that I could live like this more, because I don't know if I would agree the person that said I'd rather experience no emotion than be unhappy. But I do tend to safeguard my emotions, and maybe I only want to give them to pretty secure, in quotes, things. I know that there's nothing that is totally secure. But I think this doesn't have to be only with people. I was thinking about like careers that people choose. I was thinking about somebody, that maybe had a really safe job, but they decide I'm not happy at this job. And I'd rather be happy for a little while at this other job and maybe not have it later or something. I don't know. Could you think of other examples where it wasn't really people, but it still was a big lifestyle change?
Yeah. I mean, I said you could extend this line of thinking, even just to getting out of your comfort zone, putting yourself out there, trying something new, going back to school. I mean, it could apply to a lot of anything that you're taking a risk, where you could be hurt or rejected or fail.
Yeah, Julie, that brings to mind the woman that we had on. She was a friend of yours that we interviewed, and she went back to school, and it was a lot harder than she thought. I think she was pretty miserable at the time. Then I don't even think she got a job in the field afterwards, so it was still kind of a nightmare.
Yeah.
This is definitely, we should link to her story because it's wonderful.
I can link to that in the show notes.
Okay. So her testimony is fabulous. And this is something that our family has 100% experienced. This is the direction of Bryce and my marriage. This is direction of the last 25 years together. We did sacrifice for him to go back to school after we had Abby and Grant. And so that was a season of life, the 2 years that we hardly saw him, for working, for going to school full time. And that was in an effort to be happy later. We knew we were going to be unhappy for 2 years. We knew we would hardly see him for 2 years. And we also knew that we were going to accumulate some debt over 2 years, but we felt like it was worth the investment in his education to go someplace, because he was so unhappy in his job before that he wanted to actually change careers just like a couple years after graduating with his bachelor's. And so this was an effort to give him a lot of years in a career that he loved. He's like, if I'm going to go to work all day, every day, I want to enjoy what I'm doing. And right now I don't. I'm going to need more education to get to that point. And so that happened. And then we continued to choose his career over being stable in one place. We could have stayed in one place several times and been there a lot longer. But we chose, and I wouldn't say it was a monetary thing. I would say it was the adventure. We wanted a life of adventure. We wanted a life of interacting in the world, in different cultures, in different parts of the United States, different peoples. And so this is something that each of our kids has experienced. So they have been exposed to different cultures and peoples and parts of the country, and they can talk to anyone because of it, but it's come with a trade-off. We haven't lived in the same house where we have notches on the door frame of how tall they were 10 years ago. They haven't grown up with friends down the road that they've known forever and ever. And so sometimes I feel like we've missed some things. At the same time, again, it's a trade-off.
Yeah.
We have chosen a different way of life.
Well, I was going to say, I think going back to school, I think maybe we're flipping the quote with this one. We're saying it's better to be unhappy for a little while than unhappy forever.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's what we did.
But this quote is, it's better to be happy for a little while than unhappy forever. But my brother was telling me about somebody who made a career choice at his school that I thought kind of was that. They were willing to take a job that only has federal funds for 5 years because they thought the job would be so enjoyable, even though at the end of 5 years, they might be unhappy that they forego getting their foot in somewhere else, establishing seniority. Their job might completely disappear. But they're like, no, I'll take the 5 years on the front end. I don't know if I always live like that. Do you guys live like that?
No, because it's risky.
Yeah. The older I get, the less risk I'm willing to take.
Now, see, I was thinking that maybe the older you got, or like maybe with Mindy after moving several times, that some things might get easier because you've seen both sides now. Like you do survive, hurts heal, and you grow and mature and you learn things from those things. So that's also another way to look at it is,
right.
Once you see this isn't going to kill me, you might be willing to risk more next time.
We do have a lot of survival instincts, and but I will say that like the older Bryce and I get, the less risk we're willing to take, and we want to adventure, but we want to come back home to the same home. So we're definitely slowing down in that life of adventure. But one aspect I wanted to bring up to you guys, something that I feel like I have been so curious about, I know so many families have lovingly gone down this road, is foster care.
I was thinking about foster care.
Oh man, I feel like you're signing up to be hurt.
Yeah.
And it breaks my heart to think about going down that road because you're trying to be a mom, and we already know there's pain associated with that, but like this is even more hurt because you have like no control over how long or what that child has been through, and I just cannot imagine that. But that's like the life of this quote to me is foster care.
Yeah. I think of all the people that are willing to do ministries and service for people where the end road is often pain for them, or sadness. And I think like so many times people are like, choose to do things that make you happy. And some jobs or callings or ministries, they might fulfill you. You might feel like you are doing what God told you to do. You might be doing what is put into your lap at the time. And you might even enjoy it while you're doing it. But then you're going to feel bad. Julie, you're nodding your head.
Well, they don't always have big worldly payoffs. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like maybe not a lot of recognition or even financial reward sometimes,
Yeah.
Yeah. I know people in ministry suffer a lot sometimes.
They do. Like Bryce has come home talking about certain nurses or medical professionals that are called specifically to hospice. They are called to be there at the end of life. And going into it, that's you're dealing with that, with losing that patient. And I just, it is a calling.
Yeah.
This all makes me think of that book. I mentioned it, I think in our summer episode of what we were reading. It's called What If It's Wonderful?
Oh,
yes.
Just because so many times I think the things we fear or worry about don't happen, or they're not as bad as we thought they were, or they are, but God is there,
Right.
And she talks a lot about celebrating in the midst of sorrow. And that's kind of where I am. Like I look and think, how can I be happy? Or if I am happy, I think this feels so wrong, to be happy because look at this, look what could happen. But what if it didn't happen? Or what if something happened to me first and I never had to, that would be a shame to have wasted the time we have right now to be happy. I don't know what's going to happen to either one of us really. And I just try to keep that in mind. Like now is the time to be happy, not later, not to plan on it to be later. Because you don't know and you don't want to have any regrets.
Right. I don't know if you feel this way, Mindy. Julie, I know that you would say, quit feeling that way, but I can't help it. I thought of this when I read this article. I was trying to think of times when I may have done something that makes me happy for a time, knowing that it might make me unhappy later. And I was thinking about being a stay-at-home mom. And I'm talking about being a stay-at-home mom after your kids have gone to school, because everybody says you're gonna regret it. If they don't say it to your face, they say it through media outlets. They say it through, I don't know. I just feel like so many people imply and scare me over the years in that I'm going to regret it. You're going to regret not keeping up with your career. You're going to regret being alone when your kids leave. You're going to be sad. You're going to be devastated. Basically, I'm going to be hobbled up in a hole in a fetal position when my kids leave. This is how I feel. But my other choice is to go back to work while I'm still happy staying at home. And I'm still happy doing what I'm doing. So I feel like I've chosen to be happy in the present, knowing that I might be completely a basket case at the end. And I don't know, can you relate to that at all, Mindy?
I absolutely 100% can. In another aspect of it, of looking at it, that I did not ever finish my education. I was married young. Bryce and I was 18, he was 20. And that has been something that has been talked about with me or pushed on me, and also thoughts that I've had myself is, well, if something happens to Bryce, I'm not going to be able to, keep up with our lifestyle or take care of the children or pay off the house or, whatever. And so that's constantly been, while I stay at home, and I'm like, ooh, should I go and finish school now? Like, well, do I want to do? I'm a different person now. And so that has not been a popular opinion. However, it's my opinion. And I've gotten more comfortable with it because like you, Marie, I'm like, well, I'm happy now. Why would I become unhappy in my happiness because of the unknown?
Right.
You know? And so Bryce is like, look, Mindy, there's plenty of life insurance. We've planned for it. If something happens to me, you can go to school then. Like you'll be really unhappy.
You'll be unhappy about a lot of things at once.
Grieving while in school. I say I shouldn't laugh about that, but I mean that is exactly the conversations that we have had. It's like,
yeah,
my whole family is functioning very well. Why would I rock the boat?
Yeah, it's easy to say to play. What do they call it? Monday quarterback. What do they call that? What's that word?
Monday morning quarterback.
Yeah. Like, well, yeah, sure. Like, but you were happy doing that, so you can't. You can't say, "Oh, I would have given all that up," like just because now you want something different. It's like saying, "Oh, I shouldn't have gone to medical school because someday I'll retire." Like, well, no. I mean,
right.
Think of all the years of happiness that were in there.
Right.
Fulfillment.
Yeah, this article brought a lot of things to mind, and listeners, I hope it's made you think a little bit too. I am going to try to remember it the next time I'm making some kind of decision. I don't know. It stretched me a little bit to read this one.
Yeah.
Okay. So that was the first idea that we were going to talk about today. The next idea is also something where we should be stretching ourselves. The quote for this one is called, "Boredom is what my brain needed." And boy, I don't even want to read that essay because I'm like, don't tell me that. Not listening. But I already know that it's going to be convicting right from the beginning. But basically, this woman notices that she can't do anything without something in her ears. How can she exercise without listening to something? She noticed how she'd been pairing her routines with something to listen to, always with the intent of making the task more pleasurable. Before I got out of the shower, I turned on a podcast. Vacuuming or folding laundry, perfect time for an audiobook. I couldn't even brush my teeth before bed without someone chattering in my ear. The COVID outbreak made things worse. Given the 24/7 togetherness with the family, I discovered shamefully that I could be alone by popping in my earbuds. So anyways, I don't know if you guys can relate to those sentiments, but she decided that this is probably not healthy. Like, I should probably make some changes. So she did. She decided to take her dogs for a walk without her earpods. And she said she did notice the birds chirping and the sun filtering through the trees, but mostly she was just bored. And by the time she circled back, she felt calmer and clearer, as though the fog had lifted and her thoughts had evaporated. She could actually hear herself think, maybe boredom was what my brain needed. And I thought, so many times that probably is what my brain needed. She kind of closes out saying, a fact of modern life is that having a fire hose of entertainment at our fingertips means it's all too easy to distract ourselves right out of our own minds. And even if it's a little dull, it's a moment of stillness, a chance to be alone with our thoughts. And maybe it's the only one we'll get all day. So were you guys as convicted by this as I was when you read it?
Well, I do go through phases where I feel like I have too much input. Like, I loved her phrase, drinking from the fire hose of entertainment, because I do like to try to listen to books, and I love podcasts, and I love news podcasts, and I love listening to Bible apps and sermons, but if I find myself kind of restless and antsy and fretful, I know it's because there's been too much input. Like, there can be too much of a good thing, too much learning, taking in new information. And if I never process it and figure out, well, what am I going to do with this? How am I going to apply it or let it shape my thinking? Then it's really just noise. And so I don't have a hard time turning it off. I'll realize sometimes I'm in the car and I'm already at my destination and nothing was on. No radio, no nothing. I can easily take walks without listening to anything, just because I don't know. I don't call it boredom though. I don't know what. I don't know what. Just quiet, peace.
Right. That's what I was going to say, Julie. Is that it was several years ago that I realized that I was afraid of silence. I was afraid of nothing of, no noise. It was a practice that I started to try to be okay with silence. Then I realized that the more silence I allowed myself, the more my mind could wander, the more creative I was, the more things came to mind. I couldn't believe how many thoughts that generated, but it needed space because I had more thoughts generating from silence than thoughts generating from some sort of input from something else, because I could allow myself to follow the squirrel wherever it wanted to go. And a lot of times it was going great places that I just didn't give myself time to go before. And so some of my most creative days, or the days that I'm most productive, are the days that are most silent. And I call them silent days now. There are certain times where there has been a lot of stimulus, or we've had people or activity or whatever it is. And I know I need to come home and I just need to not have any noise. And I'm very productive. And it's the most restful, peaceful, energizing, best recovery are silent days.
Yeah, it can be kind of a learning curve to be comfortable in your own thoughts. And you think about people that sing in the shower or get great ideas. That's kind of a funny, scenario to think about, getting great ideas into the shower. But if you've got a podcast going in the shower, that is not going to happen.
You're always hearing other people's ideas.
Right.
You're never generating any of your own.
Yeah, talking to yourself, bouncing those ideas back and forth.
Yeah. I guess it was convicting for me because I really did used to walk with nothing. I would go out for a walk by myself and not bring anything. Like I didn't even have anything. And then I discovered podcasts. And all of a sudden, it was so much more fun to go for a walk. And the walk went by so much more quickly. And then I discovered wireless earbuds. And I could move around my kitchen do my dishes, like everything. I painted whole rooms, and it was a total pleasure because it was a way to listen to this podcast. Like, I don't know. I felt like I kind of got used to listening to things.
That's one thing. I love to listen to podcasts in the kitchen over the loudspeaker because it drives me nuts. My son walks around with his headphones on all the time, and I'm just talking away, and he hasn't heard a word I said. And, that drives me nuts that you have to interrupt. So I'd rather everybody know Mom is listening to this.
Yes.
I know, but then everybody makes fun of it.
I don't care.
Maybe they'll learn something. I feel like anytime I put my AirPods in, I'm telling everybody else no. And so, Julie, I'm similar to you. I'm on the receiving end pretty much all the time. Bryce and the boys love listening through their earbuds, and I'm the one that's not. And so I've had to get comfortable saying, "Hey, I'm trying to talk to you," and I don't enjoy having to do that. But I just, I'm just kind of like, all right, I'll choose my battles.
Okay, so my house is not the only one then where the people are walking around with AirPods in their mouth, in their ears.
No, because I feel like I'm being rude if I put AirPods in my house when people are home, because I feel like I'm telling them no.
Yeah.
Like I'm not available for you.
But your other family members don't feel that way.
They don't. They're not convicted. Not one bit. I am, though.
I know. I feel guilty too. I feel guilty too, yet everybody else can walk around with whatever they want in their ears 24/7.
I know. It is a odd thing. I don't enjoy it because I feel like I'm closed off to the world in a way. Like, I don't know, like I've put blinders on when I will listen to most of my stuff out loud.
And then you clear the room because they're like, I can't listen to my AirPods and what she's listening to.
Yeah. My AirPods only come out every once in a while.
Okay. Yeah. Well, this is an interesting essay. Think about it, listeners. Boredom or just silence really might be what your brain needs. And I do think that I used to sit in silence a lot more. before, I think like the more you put in your mind, it's almost like the more you feel like you want to put in your mind. And there's a never ending amount. Like we're not going to be able to put it all in there.
I think I'm turned off by the word boredom too. I've always hated that word. Like when a kid says I'm bored, like it's okay,
Yeah.
It's okay to sit in silence. It's okay to be creative and have to think up something and,
Right. All right. Well, our third essay is about a quote that says, "A good quit feels powerful." And I just knew when I read this that Julie would love this.
I love this one.
Okay. So basically, it is about somebody who's saying it's okay to quit things. Pretty much that is the summary. Maybe the trick isn't sticking everything out. The trick is quitting the right thing at the right time. The trick is understanding that saying no thank you to something you're expected to accept isn't failure. It's a whole other level of success. All right, Julie, what about this appeals to you?
Well, I have a hard time quitting things. And there's always this yucky, vague sense of guilt when I quit things. And I don't even know where that's what I wanted to figure out is where is that coming from? Because even as a kid, if my parents kind of gave me a way out, like you don't have to do this, I still had a hard time quitting. And that's why I took piano for 12 years. And that's why I wanted to play the piano, the flute, soccer, tennis, volleyball, track, swimming, like I don't know if that was maybe fear of missing out. I just wanted to be involved. I don't know. I think it's like perseverance is a virtue, right? Like that's a good thing. We're taught that's a good thing. Don't quit. But I started thinking about like, as I got older, like I wanted to go to medical school from the time I was a freshman in high school. Like I had an awesome teacher, Miss Watson. She just opened up all these doors and thoughts about medical school. And then I had that until my sophomore year of college. And I quit that idea of going to medical school. And it was a really, really hard decision, but I knew it was right. But it was hard because you felt like you were so invested in it, like well, everybody knows this. I've told everybody this. Like, what are they going to think? And I loved what, I don't know if she said this in the article or if I read this somewhere else, like, but quitting is okay if your goals have changed or continuing it doesn't align with what you now value. And what I then started to value was I knew I wanted a family over a career. And so I didn't need to hang on to that. It was okay to let that go. But that was probably the hardest thing I've ever had to quit. And some of it was other people's thinking of it, but it was really just hard for me to let it go. So
yeah,
I don't know.
That is a hard one.
Where my mind went.
I didn't even know that you did that.
Yeah, I changed to pharmacy school because I thought that's a career I could do. You could be in and out of with a family. So
right. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know why we do feel so ashamed of quitting. Do you feel shame around quitting, Mindy?
Yes. Ironically, before we even knew we were doing this topic, Bryce and I had a discussion in the past week about there are certain things that we have each kind of thought about that we've been afraid to tell each other because we would be afraid to let each other down if we don't pursue it. And so that was the topic of our conversation. Like in my silence, I have had some creative thoughts and I just am too afraid to tell anybody. I was even afraid to tell Bryce because if I changed my mind, if my goals changed, if it became not important, and I didn't pursue it, I did not want him to see me as a quitter. And he had some things. He was like, that's why I was afraid to tell you about this. And like, I've been thinking about this. And we just had a really great conversation where we both pretty much said, like, these are things we've thought about, but I've been afraid to like say it out loud because of this, the pressure.
There is so much pressure around quitting. This is kind of tongue in cheek, but is it better to have tried and quit than never to have tried at all?
No, you didn't.
But it's a real question. Like, is it better to have at least tried it and quit?
you develop a pattern. I mean, you don't know
I
how
guess
to stick
that's
to
the fear.
some
Maybe if you try too many things and quit them, if you're afraid that you'll quit everything. I don't know.
That's where my mind went.
Well, I know as an adult, a more recent example is something that I tried to love that I've quit over and over again. And I'm just going to tell you right now,
what is
not
it?
doing this.
Cookies?
Is knitting.
Knitting? Oh, but I've seen you knit so many times over the years.
No, you haven't.
I have.
I have friends that love to knit. There's even a knitting group, a multi-generational, wonderful knitting group. It sounds like a wonderful skill to have, especially as you get older and maybe you can't do other things. But I just have tried to like it. I've made a few things. I don't feel like I'm very good at it. Every time I pick it up, it's like reinventing the wheel. I don't know what I'm doing. And I'm just not going to do it anymore.
Yeah. I learned to knit, but I gave myself permission to quit after a certain thing. I only make small square dishcloths. That's all I make. I gave myself permission to learn it, and I gave myself permission to go no farther after I learned this one thing.
Good for you.
But yeah, because if I start trying to do sweaters, and I end up with like mismatched sleeves or 3 sleeves, like I'm going to feel like a real loser and I'll end up quitting the whole thing altogether.
I know. Our friend Judy made socks. I was like, okay, there is no way I'll ever make a sock. And if I did, I'd probably only make one because I'd never make the other one.
No, there are conversations that I have with myself in my head that are like, Mindy, you just don't care enough about that. Let it go. Like it doesn't define you. It doesn't make you a better person. It's okay that you're not good at that. You're good at these other things. Here, let's remind yourself what you're good at, because then I could feel a little better about myself for not being good at the other things that I've tried.
I just feel so bad, you guys. I feel like you, Mindy, that when I try something, I don't even want to tell anybody. It's not even that I'm thinking about trying. It's like I've actually trying it, but I don't want to tell anyone anymore because they're going to bring it up. Like, Julie, I know you love your ESL. Well, based on your recommendation, I signed up for ESL one year. I did not enjoy ESL. I didn't enjoy it. I may have enjoyed a different type of teaching, but I quit. This was like 4 years ago. I had someone in my family the other day ask me how's my ESL going. It's like, okay, another thing that Marie tried and quit. I have tried homeschooling 2 different times. I am a terrible teacher of other people. I have 0 patience. I know one way to say it. If you don't get it after that, I'm done. Like, I don't like teaching. And yet, I feel shameful, though. I'm now telling it on the podcast, but I feel ashamed that I tried homeschooling. I love the concept so much. I want those pictures, those idyllic pictures, but I couldn't make them happen to save my life.
But Marie, you've been podcasting for almost 5 years now.
Only because you've dragged me along, Julie.
Listen, this is one of the things, a bright spot in my life. I'm like, I haven't quit the podcast. Married for 25 years. Okay. I haven't dropped off any children any place and left them. So that's a testimony. But
marriage, 34 years.
But homeschooling, you and I are on the same wavelength with the homeschooling. I think that's what solidified our relationship actually back in Nashville. Like that was the only season of my life I cried every single night. Like, it's either mom's health or homeschooling. Okay, they're going back to school. Grant said the other day, I remember my teacher asking me 1 month after I left school why I was back so soon.
Isn't it embarrassing, Mindy? It's such a public humiliation.
Oh, yeah, the teacher's asking. Grant remembers.
It's awful. Terrible.
But I will say the only way I think I was able to be successful, like with my health journey in the past, was I was very tight-lipped. I didn't say a word to anybody. I couldn't talk about it because I was already afraid I was going to let myself down. I could not be keeping other people keeping tabs with other people.
Yeah.
That's interesting because so many people say, oh, accountability helps them. But
well, there's different types of accountability. There really are. And so I'm not going to put this big proclamation out there. I'm starting a health journey for the next 75 days. I'm going to only do this. I'm like, dude, you just sealed your fate. Like, I'm dead already before I've even started. I would tell you when I was done with the 75 days.
Yeah.
And I would encourage you along, but I can't, now the outward accountability I need is just meeting people at the gym. Like,
yeah. Right.
And so, but I can't proclaim something.
Right.
Because I won't do it.
Marie, I remember I said I talked up wanting to learn to weave. And I remember Marie asking me several times, have you ever done anything with that?
Oh, no.
And then I think she even found me a class. She was like, there's a class at the library.
No. Marie's like, come on, Julie, you need to follow through. Reach your goals.
Actually, I think that's what inspired me to finally weave something, though. So I've woven one thing.
I think you did weave one thing.
It's like, oh, Marie's going to ask me.
I think the problem is that we call so many things quitting when maybe they've just come to their natural end. Like, I did oil painting for a few years and I decided I didn't want to do it anymore. It was a decision. That can be a natural ending point. I am getting a little bored with my same exercise routine. It's been like a year and 4 or 5 months, and I'm thinking in a couple months I might try some other things. Like, I don't know that should be perceived as quitting my boot camp. No. It should be perceived as that was good and now I need something fresh, or my mind can't make myself do it anymore.
Yeah, no, I think quitting would be if you just quit all exercise and sat around and didn't do anything. That would be quitting. Right. But changing up, I mean, I don't think we have to be like nailing everything we do. You can choose what you get to do and how well you want to do it. Like, like I kind of feel guilty every time I see our piano in the taking up all that space in one room. Like, okay, I took for 12 years. I should be in there practicing, but I don't really want to. Like, it's okay that I'm not a master at the piano, I can play a few things for myself. I mean,
but maybe the focus should be on that we're learning new things, because sometimes the fear of quitting may cause you to stay stagnant and unhappy. I'll put that out there. And that we all continue to move forward and grow. And sometimes you have to kind of shake off some things to keep moving forward and growing. And so even like Maureen, like if I've had probably 3 different seasons of changing up my exercise routine. Sometimes I'll go for a year or 2 with one particular kind of thing. And then I'm like, I'm kind of done with that. I'm ready to learn something new.
Right.
So maybe we just say that I'm going to learn something new.
Good job. Learning something new is powerful.
Yeah.
All right, listeners, we hope that you've enjoyed our thoughts around these 3 essays today. We would love to hear your thoughts. Come and find us on Instagram at Midlife Matters Podcast, or email us at midlifematterspodcast@gmail.com. All right, Julie and Mindy, I loved hearing your thoughts on this.
Yes, this was fun.
Okay, we'll talk to you next week.
All right.
Bye. Bye. We're so happy you joined us today. You can find the show notes for this episode at midlifematterspodcast.com. Also, please tell a friend about the show and help them hit the free subscribe button on their favorite podcast app. Be sure to follow us on Instagram at Midlife Matters Podcast. That's where we post pictures and stories about all the things we talk about in each episode. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.